Chapter 15. What's Wrong with Maxwell? Evan kept his promise to her, but it took a while. First there was the commotion of Mrs. Tresky hugging them both about 100 times. Then Pete phoned the police to call off the search party. Then Evan told everyone how they'd found Grandma because Jessie had figured it out, because Jessie was so smart. She liked that part. Then there was dinner, which was just canned soup and cold sandwiches, because no one had the energy to cook a real meal, but everyone was starving. And then Mrs. Tresky said she wanted to get Grandma to bed early. Never mind that it was New Year's Eve. Which is when Jessie said she wanted to go see Maxwell, and Evan said he'd walk her over. The snow had stopped falling and a bright moon had broken through the clouds, so Mrs. Tresky said yes, but be back soon. When Maxwell's house came into view, Evan stopped on the path. I'll wait back at the house, okay? Just call when you want to come home. Evan had never been inside Maxwell's house, so maybe he felt funny about going in. Or maybe Evan just didn't want to talk to Maxwell's mom about what happened that afternoon. Jessie could understand that. She had hoped to avoid Mrs. Cooper altogether, somehow slip inside unnoticed. Maybe she wasn't even home. But instead, Maxwell's mom answered the door and asked Jessie to sit in the living room while she finished loading the dishwasher. Jessie sat down on the couch and looked at the photographs on top of the piano. There were dozens of them, and they were all of Maxwell. Mrs. Cooper walked out of the kitchen, drying her hands on a dish towel. She sat on the couch next to Jessie. Usually, Jessie felt comfortable around grown-ups, sometimes more comfortable than with kids, but not this time. Mrs. Cooper stared at her with a look as hard as granite. So, what happened this afternoon? Jessie took a minute to think. Should she tell the whole story? Or would Maxwell get in trouble? Had they broken any rules? What if she just left out the part about spying? In the end, she figured the whole story was going to come out anyway. She might as well give it up now. So she told Mrs. Cooper everything from the very beginning about the missing bell and what Maxwell overheard on the bus and the stakeout and how wrong it had gone. She described the frog and then the rock through the window and how Maxwell ran away screaming. Mrs. Cooper listened without saying a word. When she was done talking, Jessie waited for Mrs. Cooper's response. But all she said was, I wish those boys had never moved to the neighborhood. Me too, said Jessie, thinking about the missing bell. She was sure the boys had it hidden somewhere. But why is Maxwell afraid of them? He's bigger than they are. They'd tease him, playing mean jokes on him. About a month ago, they tricked Maxwell into climbing inside a cardboard moving box. They said it was a game, but instead of a game, they taped him up inside the box and left him like that for hours. Maxwell doesn't like tight spaces. That's horrible, said Jessie. She couldn't imagine being trapped like that. It made her legs and arms feel twitchy just to think about it. Mrs. Cooper looked across the room, then shook her head slowly. They're just mean boys. They sure were. But why? Were they born that way? Were some people born one way and some people another? You can go see Maxwell now if you want, said Mrs. Cooper, standing up and snapping the dish towel over her shoulder. He's in the room playing a video game. Jessie jumped off the couch and headed for the stairs that led down to the basement, which was where Maxwell's bedroom was. She was on the third step when she stopped and turned around. Mrs. Cooper, said Jessie, what's wrong with Maxwell? Mrs. Cooper paused in the doorway to the kitchen and looked at her. He's just different, that's all. He sees things differently than we do. He feels the world in a different way, too. Things bother him that wouldn't you or me, like loud noises or changes in his routine or new people. To us, they're no big deal, but to Maxwell, they're a very big deal. And even though Maxwell's incredibly smart, there are some things he has trouble understanding, like feelings. He has a really tough time understanding feelings. Oh, said Jessie, like me, she thought. She found Maxwell leaning against the giant gorilla pillow that sat at the head of his bed. The arms of the gorilla wrapped around Maxwell as if the big furry ape were trying to reach the game controller Maxwell held in his hands. Maxwell didn't even look up when Jessie walked in. "Hey," she said. Maxwell nodded his head, his eyes never leaving the screen. Jessie stared at the TV. The game was one of those questing games where dwarves and dragons and giants and other magical characters fight each other and collect treasure. Pretty soon she was sitting on the edge of the bed, as caught up in the game as Maxwell was. "Can I try?" asked Jessie. "No, I'm right in the middle of a quest. Later." "When later?" "When I die." "When are you going to die?" Maxwell shrugged. "Probably not for a while. I'm really good at this game." Jessie watched the treasure plants pile up on the counter in the upper right corner of the screen. Maxwell's character, a twinkly-eyed dwarf with a mohawk, seemed invincible. He killed a dragon, 2 evil elf twins, and a giant with a weapon that could shoot lightning bolts. "I'd wish we'd had one of these when Jeff and Mike tried to hurt that frog," said Jessie. Maxwell nodded his head. "I would have killed them both." "You're not supposed to want to kill people in real life," she said. But she knew what he meant. She really didn't like those boys. And even though Evan and Jessie and Maxwell had managed to save the frogs, she knew that the Sinclair boys would do something just as awful again someday. Who would be around them to stand up to them? Besides that, Jessie was sure they had the bell, hidden in the barn or smashed under the porch or maybe buried out in the woods. "Do you think they've got it?" she asked Maxwell. "The bell, I mean?" "Nope," said Maxwell, punching furiously on the controller buttons. It was amazing how fast he was. Jessie watched as his dwarf decapitated a black-robed warlock. "Why not?" "Because I know where it is." Jessie continued looking at the screen, not understanding what Maxwell had just said. Was he talking about something in the game? Maybe he didn't get what she was talking about. "You know where what is?" "The bell," said Maxwell. "Dang!" He pointed at the screen. I lost a life, but I can buy it back." 10,000 points fell off the counter, and Maxwell's dead dwarf jumped to his feet and started fighting again. "You know where the bell is?" Jessie's voice was weirdly quiet. She felt like she'd walked into a mental hospital, and you were not supposed to yell in hospitals. "Yep. Where is it?" Her voice grew a little louder. "In my closet." Oh my goodness. "In your closet?" Jessie jumped off the bed and pushed open the sliding door to the closet. On the floor was a laundry basket, an old box filled with Lego pieces, and Grandma's bell. "Why did you steal Grandma's bell?" now Jessie was yelling. "I didn't steal it. I protected it. Mrs. Joyce was in the hospital for a whole week. I didn't want Jeff and Mike to take it like they said they would, so I took it down and hid it in my closet." But why didn't you tell me that?" "Because you didn't ask." "But you knew I was looking for it. When someone's looking for something and you know where it is, you tell them." Maxwell kept playing his game. "You said it was a puzzle. You said you liked to solve puzzles by yourself. I thought you wanted to figure out on your own. But you can't just take something from someone without telling them. That's stealing." "It's not. I told Mrs. Joyce. I told her when I visited her in the hospital. I guess she forgot." "Well, duh," thought Jessie. She stared at the bell. It looked just like it always had, except it was sitting on the floor of Maxwell's closet. She really did feel like the whole world had gone crazy and left her behind. The only sane person on the planet. She couldn't think of what to say. You're smart," said Maxwell. "I'm Maxwell, and I'm smart." Jessie looked at Maxwell, who was still furiously playing the video game, killing gnomes and druids left and right. He was just like his mother had said. Maxwell was different. She grabbed hold of the top of the bell and tried to pull on it to see how heavy it really was. The bell tilted, but there was no way she could lift it. "Well, if you're so smart," said Jessie, "then tell me how you're going to get this bell out of your basement and hanging up on the hill by tonight."